moving on from the brew house to the cellar, I always like to joke that I just need a new pair of stilts because I'm always working on a ladder back here. I can manage the fermenters from ground level, but whenever I go to the bright tanks, I have to be on like a 10-foot ladder just to get it. But if I had like some construction stilts or carnival stilts, maybe I could do a little better job up there. I don't know if you can see the length of the drain, but I believe it's like an 18-foot stainless steel drain. We put that in here, and that's like the entire space, about 18, 20 foot. The fermenters, I wanted to have, dumping and all the affluent that comes out of the bottom of a fermenter, yeast and so forth, all close to the ground and easier to manage. Where the bright tanks are much cleaner, so when I'm cleaning them, having them up top is a lot easier to clean something, much cleaner tank up top than on a ladder than it would be with the fermenters, which are much dirtier when they're finished. So I decided to do that, and it just makes it easy for the flow of hoses. I really like the vertical tanks. So I don't have a huge cold box, and I share that with the kitchen as well. So for me, it would be interesting to have these as serving tanks, but I like them more functional as holding tanks and bright tanks. So with my capacity, I needed somewhere to store the beer. I didn't have a large cold box in order to put all the kegs in. So what I'll do is I'll start out in the fermenters, which are actually uni tanks. I'll carbon those, and I'll take off 2 or 3 kegs just to get me started. And that's sort of like, straight from the cellar. And then after that, I'll give it a week or two, because I know those 3 kegs will hold me over for a little while. And then I'll bring the rest of the beer up to the bright tanks. And those bright tanks enable me to hold and store beer so that I don't have to push them right away. And it also keeps it fresher. I don't have to push them right away into the kegs. So it's just a little bit of a buffer to keep me managing my beer and the flow of beer and the freshness of beer and also the storage of beer. So that's why, dynamically the space is small, but it enabled me to utilize it in a good way rather than having like a double fermenter. And I'm also the only brewer, so it would have been a really long day to do double beers into one fermenter, where now I just do single batches. And there's not as much blending, but it just makes it more of a unique beer each time. I don't have sight glasses on these tanks, which sight glasses are really helpful when you're looking at beers. So I use flow meters, and they do a pretty good job, but they're not as accurate as I'd like. So what I recently did was I got acrylic, where I do my dry hopping is a 4-inch TC top. And what I put in there was acrylic ones so that I can have a sight glass so that I can put my eyes on the fills in order to fill and then check just to make sure, because sometimes with adding oxygen to my transfers, when I go with a fermentation for the yeast, that I add the oxygen, well, that can throw off my meter a little bit. So, having the sight glass and being able to put eyes on it, I'll get a good level with the acrylic sight glass. But then I was like, well, I don't want to be light struck, so what do I put on there? So what do I get? I went to the thrift store and I bought a couple little stainless lids, so I don't have any light going into my fermenters. But it gives me a little cap to put on top of my sight glasses. These fermenters are really nice. They're, got a great little racking arm in them. They're uni tanks, so I can ferment and I can also carbon them. I'll dump off the bottom cone, and then I'll use the racking arm to keg really high, and then I'll keep it in there for a little while, because one of the key things is I'm trying to always maximize the capacity. So with it being a 5-barrel system, I'm always trying to get that 5-barrel, but certain beers that I'm dry hopping and stuff, I just don't get the yield. So the concept is, by using these as uni tanks, I can't just keg them all down. So what I do is I use the brights for storage, because I don't have the capacity to put all the kegs in. So what I'll do is I'll leave them in here a little longer, a little more residency time, but not too long to cause any kind of autolysis with the yeast. So I'll keg off with the racking arm the whole way up, just 2 or 3 kegs. Then I'll just give it another 2 weeks or so to just let the gravity sort of take hold. Sometimes I'll use some biofine, and I'll put that in through the hop port and just do a little burp. But I'm always trying to, not be too invasive with the beer, not be too aggressive with the beer, so I do it minimally. When I do that, then it gives me another 2 or 3 weeks to just sort of pull off the bottom maybe another week or two, then I know like, okay, well, I got to get some more kegs and I want to clarify the beer even more. So I'll set up a contraption that goes up to the bright tank. I don't always go from one to another because they're so close. I can always, if I need to go to this tank, I can. But typically I try to stay in the same stack, and I'll go straight up with my hoses and sight glasses, and I'll fine again, and I'll really clear the beer on the second one. It's almost like Zwickel beer from the first one. It's like a very, straight from the cellar with my first 3 kegs. And then a lot of times moving it up, I'll clarify it, and the rest of the tank will be much clearer even. And that's where I'll go if I'm going to throw some kegs to distribution. Everything will come off the top. But yeah, that way, I can keep in my mind without having a lot of logs that, oh yeah, this was my Belgian IPA, and now it's straight up above. So it doesn't have to, I don't have to put placards on all the tanks. I kind of know what's going on. And then being able to like carbonate here and let it residency time a little bit more. Maybe I get 5 more gallons out of that batch. And to me, 5 gallons, in a 20 barrel, 30 barrel system, you're dumping that down the drain. But here, everything counts. My margins are much less on this smaller scale. And I'm distributing and trying to stay in line with other breweries and keep my beer at the same price. I just make a little less money on them. So, but it also helps put my beer out there, and hopefully more people will come inside to visit us here. So yeah, this is my tight little quarters for my lab. And I got my sink here, my little teeny stainless table where I do cell counts, pH, gravity testing. I have to mount as much as I can to the walls. So I got this cool little rack. I even have a video system where I can like watch what's going on in the brewery all the time. So if I need to see, it's getting busy out there, my bartender needs a little extra helping hand. If I can shut down what I'm doing, or if I'm doing something manageable here, I can run out there and pour a beer if I need to. Just flasks, all kinds of stuff for, micrometers and stuff for canning. I have lab stuff for my water testing, titrations for my caustic and my paracetic, a ZOM for CO2, scales on the wall, for measuring out ingredients, all my hydrometers for finishing gravities. I even have a refractometer here if I need something really quickly to do a quick gravity reading. Sometimes at the end of my transfer, I want to know what my final gravities are in my grant so that I know, I'm not pulling any tannins. This is basically to test the carbonation. So this is a temperature gauge and a pressure gauge. And using the two in a chart, we're able to look at the volumes of the dissolved CO2 so that we can sort of reach a parameter of what we like to taste. And for different styles, there could be different levels that you get. But this is a way of measuring it. One of the other things I'm using is my hydrometers for final gravities and original gravities. I do that because it enables me to find what the measurement of the sugar in solution is. And by looking at the original gravity, which is the beginning before fermentation, before I add the yeast, and then the final gravity, I'm able to use some calculations to find out what the actual alcohol is in. So we're able to use that with our little flask here. And I measure that, put a volume of fluid in there, and then this is like floats in there, and I'm able to read on this scale these are all done in Play-Doh. So Play-Doh is what I usually use. And that gives me an indicator of like how sweet it is, how much residual sugar is involved in the beer, and how it will taste, what kind of body the beer is going to have, what kind of alcohol is in it. So I have targets, and then I measure all my batches in order to achieve those targets and to sort of dial in my science and my art. So, knowing what my system will do, knowing the science behind it, knowing about what my yeast will do, measuring the yeast, and I sort of put that all together in a loose science and creative art and come up with a way of, being able to predict what I'm going to get every time. With a small system like this, you may have a little bit more inconsistencies in batches. The larger guys with the bigger systems do a little bit more blending from, they'll maybe have a double fermenter where they run 1 or 2 or even 3 or 4 batches into the fermenter and blend them and are able to achieve a real consistent product. Me, I have to just sort of dial it in and get really good at hitting my targets so that each batch, because I don't blend, will be consistent over time. But the more times you do it, the easier it gets. I basically create my own water profiles per each batch. So a lot of people have really good water and they can just filter it. With being close to the ocean and the water that we have here, I really like to actually create my own water with my brewing salts. It gives me a consistent product and a lot of adjustability with it. I can create almost any beer, any water profile from around the world if I want by using this and salt additions and acid additions. I had them do a little funnel situation and it just didn't seem to be working, the funnel. It was like a cutout funnel, I was still spilling. So I found this little pitcher, and this is kind of like my hop cannon. So I put it in there, it works really nicely to be able to pour my hops right in, and it's really efficient and really quick. And that way, I'll purge the tank a little bit with some CO2. So when I open it up, CO2 is coming out. I'm able to do this really quick, and I don't have to take off a funnel. It just enables me to drop it in, drop it out, and then put my recap my tank. So it ended up working out really well for me. So all these bright tanks are full of beer and different levels of beer that I keg down, and that's where you're getting all this drip and condensation. Earlier on, I was talking about sight glasses. Typical sight glasses on a lot of tanks are actually a long tube that goes from the top to the bottom and will show you the level of beer in the tank. And the interesting thing about sight glasses is there's all kinds of nucleation points. There's valves in them for cleaning, and there are also places for bacteria and dirt to start to manifest and grow. So without the sight glasses, it's beautiful because then you don't have to worry about that, and you can have cleaner beer, and there may be less of a chance of infection. I really like the idea of these tanks in this kind of space. I haven't seen a lot of this in the industry, but I know there was some manufacturers that were producing smaller tanks. I think they were 3-barrel tanks like this, and there was some from China, and there's just not a lot out in the market when I was first looking. I think now they're actually producing a lot more of them like this. And it's really cool because, for me, I just couldn't make the space work without them really. And I was used to working, a lot of brewers these days are working just with uni tanks, but for my purpose of storing beer, these made the most sense, and I always worked in an area where we wanted really clear beer, so we wanted the bright tanks. So yeah, this whole setup really kind of worked for me. This manufacturer, like I said earlier, never made these tanks and wanted to do fully clad tanks. I needed the space for light, I needed the space for storage, for hoses, for adding all the electric, for my electronics, for my thermostats. So for me, the space was really neat, and I really wanted the tanks to be modular because I wanted to be able to, take them apart if I needed to. And the funny thing about bringing them in is they had to be bolted together. But the process of bringing them out might make more sense to unbolt them to take them out, be able to drop the tank from the top. So it's kind of interesting, just the modularity makes use in these small spaces to be able to maneuver the tanks around. Beside there is my process pump. So this is my main piece of equipment that I move beer around or clean. This is mostly my CIP for CIP and tanks and moving stuff around. This has been great. It's a little 3-phase. I move it all around. This is a great piece of equipment. I love it. It's got a little frequency drive on there, so I'm really able to slow things down if I need to, which is sort of important with all the different volumes and levels I have going on here. I also added a couple valves in case I ever want to come off, which means I could add a couple tanks this way if I'd like to, or even if I do a little pilot system, I want to add a couple little small fermenters here. I already added the valves so that I don't have to cut into my glycol system. I can just add on. So it's always good to have an add-on spot, and that's my add-on spot and my access. The whole glycol system too is all copper up top, but I put a couple of unions in. So we're in such a tight space that I wanted to build it all before the tanks got here, but I added the unions so that I could pull down this leg, the back leg, so that I could put all my tanks in first and then put the, it's sort of a modular glycol system as well, so that if I ever leave, I can kind of pull it down And if I ever want to take the tanks in and out, I basically am able to take the glycol system down and go in and then rebuild it. In the building process of this brewery, I was always reverse engineering everything. Like, what happens if I want to add something? What happens if I need to add a tank, pull a tank out? What happens if I need to work on something? So I always try to isolate with unions and valves whenever I could, without being too, with looking within my budget and being able to do that. I try to only use it when necessary, but just to make maintenance down the road much easier. Here we are again out the front where everything comes into fruition. The beauty about having a little nano brewery is that it's these cool little small batches. We produce the beer right in the back and it gets consumed right in the front, and that's our main focus. So the experience of people coming in and enjoying it here, that's what we're really looking for. And that's what we strive for. So here we are in the middle of the Kulturhaus, pouring a nice Erdgeist. And this is what it's all about. We get to brew the beer, taste the beer that we're brewing, and enjoy it in this great space.